Hello, everyone. I'm Jack Fisher, and welcome to my world. And I like to think that world is full of endless possibilities, one where a single decision can lead to many different outcomes. We all face decisions like that in the real world, and on more than one occasion, we might even ponder what would happen if we had made different decisions. It's a fascinating thought experiment, and it was also the premise of Marvel Studios' What If, an animated series based off an intriguing concept as well as a popular series of comics that ran for decades. Now, I was plenty intrigued by this series when it was first announced, as I tend to be with most things related to Marvel. It also helped that this series would be animated, ensuring it could explore these possibilities in ways that just would never work in live action. The actors' salaries alone would make that unfeasible. And it's true, Marvel has succeeded at so many things over the years, but animation has been one of their few shortcomings, having not made a decent animated series since they canceled Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Something many fans are still bitter about. Hopefully, What If changes that trend? Because this series proved that Marvel can still succeed with animation as well as live action. And now that the first season of What If has concluded, I'm more than convinced. This isn't just another win for Marvel Studios. It's a new foundation on which to tell some very different stories. We already got a taste of just how great some of those stories could be. They gave us a host of great new characters like Captain Carter, Star-Lord T'Challa, Party Thor, and of course, Uatu the Watcher himself. They may not be part of the mainline MCU, but they certainly made their presence felt. The sheer number of Captain Carter cosplayers I saw at New York Comic Con this past year was proof enough of that. There's just so much to love about this series, and plenty more to praise. I'll try and find the time to do so, but for now, I want to focus on what lies ahead for this series. Because even before the final episode of the first season aired, it was confirmed that a second season is in the works. And that season will explore even more possibilities, offering us other visions of a very different Marvel Cinematic Universe. And like many other Marvel fans, I've been contemplating some of those possibilities. So, for this video, I'd like to offer some possible what-if scenarios that I would love to see in Season 2. Now, please note, I have no inside information or any idea of what scenarios we'll actually get. These are just the ones I'd like to see personally. I'll also try to emphasize ideas that I think Marvel Studios might actually do, which means no episodes about Howard the Duck beating Thanos. With that in mind, here are my top 5 scenarios that I'd like to see in What If Season 2. Now, there's no question that Carol Danvers is a powerhouse. In both the comics and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, she is a heavy hitter by almost every measure. Even her detractors, who should not be taken seriously, mind you, cannot deny that. Carol can go toe-to-toe with Thanos and take down an entire fleet of Kree warships. And in the final scene of her movie, we also find out that she helped inspire the Avengers Initiative. There would be no Avengers as we know them without Carol Captain Marvel Danvers. But her absence after her fateful encounter with a young Nick Fury had major ramifications. Yes, Fury had the means to contact her earlier, but he chose not to. And yes, Carol herself had reasons for going back into space with Talos and the Skrulls. She even had her reasons for not being present during the first battle against Thanos. But what if that weren't the case? What if she had stayed on Earth instead, helping Nick Fury build S.H.I.E.L.D., the Avengers, and this new age of superheroes? This scenario really doesn't require many major changes. Maybe Carol just comes back after she helps the Skrulls find their way home. And maybe Maria Rambeau makes a more impassioned plea for her to stay. But whatever Carol's reason, she stays on Earth, and she's there to have an impact as later events unfold. That has huge implications both for the Avengers Initiative as well as other future events within the MCU. With her present, events like the Battle of New York could unfold very differently. I suspect the Avengers may still assemble, but they would function on a whole new level with a powerhouse like Captain Marvel on their side. But even if her presence helps defeat the Chitauri with ease, what about other major events? What happens with Carol present when Hydra infiltrates S.H.I.E.L.D.? What happens when she's present during the battle against Ultron? Or Infinity War for that matter? Does Thanos even succeed in getting the final stone? There are many possibilities, as well as consequences to those possibilities, and I'd love to see an episode that explores that in great detail. Now, I imagine this possibility crossed the minds of anyone who saw Avengers Endgame. Hell, it probably came up before the final credits rolled. It was, by far, one of the most dramatic moments of the entire Infinity Saga. Hawkeye and Black Widow fighting to sacrifice themselves in order to gain the Soul Stone. Hawkeye tried to make that sacrifice, but Black Widow wouldn't let him. Seeing her fight to be the one to make that sacrifice, urging him to let her go. It was such an emotional gut punch, which is why the idea of it turning out differently carries so much weight. And for that to happen, not much would really have to change. Most of the scene could play out just as we saw in Endgame. Natasha or Hawkeye would just have to slip up slightly at the last moment, making for yet another huge sacrifice. But instead, it would be Black Widow waking up with the Soul Stone in hand. It would likely be devastating for her, surely causing her plenty of anguish. She would likely carry that anguish with her in the final battle against Thanos. In addition, say she gets a call from Clint's wife as soon as the snap is undone, and she has to be the one who tells her that Clint sacrificed himself. How much does that affect Natasha? And where does it lead her from there? Even if the final outcome of Endgame is the same, it puts Black Widow in a distressing position. She could not save her friend. And with Tony gone and Captain America retired, she's not sure where she stands anymore. Does this send Natasha down a darker path? Or does it have other, less obvious ramifications? Add the events of the Black Widow movie to the mix, and there are plenty of new stories to tell. Whatever the case, there's sure to be a lot of heartbreak and drama, but that usually brings out the best in these characters, regardless of the timeline. This scenario is from one of the more recent events in the MCU. It involves Shang-Chi, one of the newer heroes to Marvel's ever-growing roster. And his movie, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, put him squarely on a hero's path. He started off just wanting to live his own life. But then he got pulled back into his father's world, and that of the Ten Rings. But in navigating that world, he made the right decisions and demonstrated his incredible fighting skills along the way. He came out a hero, and it is a near certainty that he'll eventually link up with a new generation of Avengers. But what if Shang-Chi never walked that path? In his movie, the most consequential decision he made was stepping out of his father's shadow. That was a huge deal. He'd been trained to fight all his life, to become the ultimate assassin for the Ten Rings. But after his first mission, he decided that this was not the life he wanted, and he opted instead to run off to San Francisco. But perhaps in another timeline, that first assassination mission was just one of many. Maybe Shang-Chi returns to China and stays by his father's side, becoming the dutiful son that his father wanted from the beginning, while his sister, Zhu Xiaoling, remains in his shadow. That means he never crosses paths with Katie. That means he never surrounds himself with better, less nefarious influences. That even means he never develops a fondness for karaoke. This would indeed be a darker world for Shang-Chi, and potentially many others. Because if he remained active within the Ten Rings, would Tony Stark have ever escaped his captors? Would Trevor Slattery ever have survived his whole Mandarin act? And if the Ten Rings is a more powerful organization, what does that mean for the rest of the MCU? And what does that mean for him and his father when they eventually travel to Ta Lo to save his mother? Because if Shang-Chi never opposes him and they eventually unleash the evil within, what sort of impact does that have? we saw how powerful a darker version of Stephen Strange could be. I'd be genuinely intrigued by what a darker version of Shang-Chi could entail. One of the best episodes of Season 1 of What If involved Star-Lord, albeit one who wasn't Peter Quill. In that episode, T'Challa proved just how impactful Star-Lord could be on the galaxy if guided by different influences. For T'Challa, that impact was positive. And the same might apply to Peter himself, albeit in a very different way. In Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Peter Quill was in some heartbreaking situations. Between finding out his father was Ego, the living planet, and seeing Yondu sacrifice himself at the end, this movie really put Star-Lord through the ringer, and nobody would have blamed him for being overwhelmed by it all. In the end, Peter did what he needed to do to stop his father, avenge his mother, and be the hero that the galaxy needed. But what if things played out differently? What if, in learning about his celestial heritage, Peter decides to embrace it rather than fight it? This wouldn't just put him at odds with his father, it would also put him at odds with the rest of the Guardians. I can easily see Gamora, Nebula, Yondu, Drax, Rocket, and Groot having to turn on their friend and leader, trying desperately to save him before he completely loses his humanity. It would be plenty dramatic, and it would definitely shake up the cosmic side of the MCU, having a celestial-powered Star-Lord running around. The Guardians would either have to kill their friend or be killed by him. Either outcome has far-reaching consequences. Remember, Star-Lord played an instrumental role in Infinity War, and many blame him outright for the Avengers failing to stop Thanos. But if he's not present, or if he is but has a full-blown Celestial, how does that change things? Does it mean Thanos is no longer the biggest threat in the universe? Does it mean Peter Quill becomes something that even the Avengers can't confront? These are some pretty big changes, and I would love to see what comes of them. It was one of the most ominous lines of the entire Infinity War saga. Thanos taunting Thor just before he did his infamous snap. It was a moment of great tension, teasing us, the audience, that Thor had done it. He had stopped Thanos before he could carry out his genocidal plan. Except he didn't, because, as Thanos himself pointed out, Thor didn't go for the head. That gave Thanos just the window he needed. And because of that miss, half of all life in the universe disappeared in a pile of dust. It was one of the most defining moments of the MCU, one that has had lasting consequences on every movie since. And because it was so impactful, it raises a profound question that, I imagine, some of the characters themselves have contemplated at one point. What if Thor had gone for the head? What if he actually ended Thanos where he stood, stopping him before he could snap his fingers? The near-term implications are obvious. Half the population doesn't disappear. But beyond that, well, that's where a very different MCU could emerge. In this timeline, characters like Spider-Man, Star-Lord, and Doctor Strange don't disappear. Iron Man and Captain America aren't traumatized by their failure, and nobody has to go back in time to fix everything. On the surface, that might mean this is a better timeline. However, as we saw with some scenarios in the first season, a better outcome to one event doesn't always lead to better outcomes in the long run. Remember, before Thanos even arrived, the Avengers had been split due to the events of Civil War. And some heroes like Black Widow were being actively hunted. Sure, saving the world from Thanos would be a great moment of triumph. But what would emerge from the ashes? With Asgard destroyed, what comes of Thor and his people? What comes of the Avengers who sided with Captain America? And what comes of the Guardians now that Gamora is dead and gone? Some good could come from all this, but there could also be some unforeseen consequences. What that could be, I don't know, but I'd love to see it play out, if only to show what a difference Thor's aim could have made. Again, these are just my personal top 5 scenarios that I would love to see. I'm sure Marvel Studios has already made bigger, bolder plans for Season 2, and we probably won't know the extent of those plans until next year. But in a show that explored so many possibilities, these are the stories I hope to see play out, if only in part. What If is a great series. It explores the Marvel Cinematic Universe in a new way, putting a different twist on these characters that we grew to love over the past decade. And as the MCU continues to grow, introducing new characters, new stories, and bolder concepts, there will be plenty more avenues to explore. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing how the MCU unfolds in the phases to come. But with each new movie, it's also exciting to know that we could see another version of those stories play out in this series. Moreover, it'll be interesting to see how these versions interact. We already saw how great they could be with the Guardians of the Multiverse in the Season 1 finale. Who knows how much greater it'll be as that multiverse continues to grow and expand. Whatever happens, I'll definitely be among those watching closely. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and thank you for joining me in my world/timeline. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, regardless of where you are in the multiverse, take care and stay safe.